it's been talked about plenty, and we don't need to really go into it in depth or length, but we now know, as I'm sure was predicted on this podcast, that a Jeff Bezos dick pic does exist. Like, that's important.
Right.
Oh, God,
There's somebody that hacked him, right? And is like holding on to this, basically.
I think so. That's the only way it could happen, right?
Like, it hasn't been released. It's more of a like.
It's not a court document.
Yeah.
The Daily Mail says they have it and won't release it.
Oh, the Daily Mail says they have it. Okay.
Trashy British tabloid.
Yep. Yeah.
So.
We live in the best news cycle.
That's like you know the those documents that Snowden stole that they had to destroy. They like agreed to the government's demands and had to they cut it in half with a saw and then threw it in plasma
or something.
Yeah, they're gonna have to do that, is what I'm saying.
I don't know. I think eventually we will see it. Whether we want to or not, at some point it will out.
Well, what bigger innovator is there but nature? So I mean, I think it should hang in the hallowed halls of the center.
So to speak.
Yeah.
I think the real problem is that Jeff Bezos is so mediocre that even his dick is just the most mediocre, boring dick, and nobody's gonna care when they see it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's so much anticipation now too. Yeah. So he'd have to be special, for it to matter.
Yeah. There's been some speculation about whether he's an alien or not.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's good.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing we've tried to keep up on is his quest to mate with an extraterrestrial, and that's the dick pic I want to see. Is the one that's etched in gold, and that has already been shot into space.
Yeah.
With a complete profile. A genius level innovator, totally hairless.
According to the Seattle Times, started in a small garage in Bellevue as well.
That was a beautiful
ramshackle.
Yeah,
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
you gotta love
these
it.
people in their fucking garages.
Glassy baby in her garage.
Yeah.
But she didn't make any of her glass in.
I mean, if you think about it, the extra real estate given to car culture has created an economy of garage innovation space that we'll all be thankful for years to come. I don't know. This is a theory I'm working on. Let's come back to this on episode 45. And, but hey, it's good to be back.
Season 2.
Season 2, new year.
Season 2.
That
Yeah.
will Greg insist.
Episode 2 of season 2. I insist we keep track of that.
For some reason, yeah. Are we doing this?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
it's happening. So we have 2 special guests too. So I'm Colin. You probably recognize me. You just heard Greg.
Hey, I'm Greg.
Waxing something about garage space. And 2 special guests, a return guest, Brian Platt. Welcome back. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you.
Mary, a historian and teacher in the area. And we're glad to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys. Thanks for coming back, Brian, our first returning guest.
Yeah.
That's
so special.
Brian Platt, we know you from Twitter, and he's been
Jacobin,
and he's published in Jacobin, and he knows a lot about cops. It's a kind of a dark obsession of his that is actually borderline unhealthy.
Somebody asked me this weekend how I got into this because I'd heard your podcast. They go, "How'd you get into that?" And I honestly had no answer. I was about to say something, and I just I sighed deeply, stared into the abyss.
Oh my gosh!
It all started with, I think, 9/11 and Alex Jones, and you tapped that well as far as you could.
The second George Bush did 9/11, I knew I had to get on this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, you were just telling us, both of you, that you were like anti-war before it was cool.
Yeah.
Way back in the day in Texas.
Yeah, we were in Crawford in 2000.
The 1 year anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. We're at George Bush's ranch. We really showed them. The locals came out. I think they had a good time.
I think I probably saw a picture of you on like Daily Kos or HuffPo or something.
I was on a 7-foot-tall unicycle.
I was hoping it was like
did HuffPo exist?
Like that scene in Roma.
I think it did.
Yeah, by 2002 probably. I don't know.
He was lighting trees on fire or something, shooting guns out back.
Yeah.
Trying to infiltrate.
That was the first time I ever saw Alex Jones in the flesh, too.
Yeah, so they
and
had
he stole the mic.
Yeah, they had all these speakers.
Whoa.
I think they're waiting for Ralph Nader to show. This is how this gives you a real slice of the time. And Ralph Nader was sick and was flying in, and he spoke anyways. And I remember looking at you and being like, Ralph Nader will be dead within the year. And he looked awful. He looked like he was already dead.
He gave a great speech.
But
bad.
While people are waiting, this big husky guy gets on the stage and just starts going, "Do you guys know about the globalists? The globalists in the war?" And I think I even at that time I knew who he was because of Stupid Lubbock, and I was like, "That's Alex Jones." Let's see where this goes.
What was his presence at that point? He had a radio show, nationally syndicated.
It was in Austin.
I don't know if it was nationally syndicated.
Really? So
it was big in the state.
Ground
It was big in the state.
Oh yeah, we knew.
Whoa!
Like I remember watching Richard Linklater movies and him being in them, like early stuff.
I think the Iraq War stuff is what made him like a national character, but a thought leader. Mm-hmm. But the 9/11 stuff happened, and I remember the regular anti-war movement, the normals, the normies. We were out there like trying to like say like, hey, I think going to war in Afghanistan is bad, and like all the future things that are about to happen are bad. And I just remember these kids would come up, college kids, right? I was a college kid at the time too, but they would come to these meetings and be like, "Oh, did you know that like World Trade Center 7 had to be a controlled demolition?" and that's how I was introduced to Alex Jones, just being like, "What the fuck is happening right now?"
You heard clanging of change in people's pockets.
Yeah. Thankfully, I didn't have to watch the
documentary.
The documentary until years later.
Did you ever have to talk anyone down after watching that documentary?
Yeah,
have you had that experience?
So many people, yeah.
That was so big in Texas. You'll know. You'll even know.
Even here, though, like weird, because that, like, if I'm not even talking about people like in that like Alex Jones type milieu who were like committed. I'm just like total normies who just like on Netflix or something one day sat down and were like, what the fuck is like just like totally like terrified about the world around them, and it's something like I've had this conversation at least twice, like, and it's something like, listen, yes, the world is a giant sinister conspiracy, but but
they just don't typically involve holograms and lasers.
Exactly. And like, yeah, so that shit's full of shit, and man, that's a weird scene to have to.
Yeah, I mean that's why we became weirdly experts in a lot of this stuff, really digging into who like Alex Jones was we had a lot of folks, great, like really honest folks, but who just, this is where they got one in, and this is how conspiracy theories work, right? Is there's always that kernel of truth, right, for marginalized folks, right, whether it's marginalized by class, race, whatever, that there is something fucked up, and it's the difference between conspiracy theories, which are not liberatory, right? Conspiracy theories where there's all-knowing forces and presences you can never fight back against. And to me, it's always been about, like, you have to know, one, about the particulars of the conspiracy theory you're trying to convince somebody is incorrect, but also it's unlocking the idea that, like, is believing in this helping you move forward in life, or is it keeping you stuck, right, in the ways that, like, what if we look at why something actually is happening, right?
Yeah.
The ways that in the 9/11 case, there's an opportunism that's happening here. Like, nobody's smart enough to have predicted this and made this happen. There were just people who
dumb enough
in,
to have let it happen
and
stepped in and cashed in on it.
And then spin it at the end, you know, and the ways that if you can acknowledge, like, that fairly simple difference between the two, you can help somebody realize revolutionary potential versus, like, defeat and defeatism.
Yeah, well, what you said about it, the different, like, a dichotomy of, like, liberatory conspiracy theory versus non-liberatory, and that makes a lot of sense to me because I think like it's something that's so by sort of for now like generations the sort of mainstream thought has really really shamed and denied the conspiratorial thinking in America, but it's like it's just normal people's bullshit meter like just busting through the top digits like.
Yeah.
Like people look around and go and look at the last like their over the course of their life and the shit they've heard from authorities, politicians, the media, all the shit add up, and this is like this shit doesn't fucking add up. Something's fucking wrong. It's bullshit, and it's like yeah, man, it's just not lizard people.
Yeah.
It's way fucking simpler. It's actually like a way more tenuous, like not as powerful. Thing that's happening that you could stand up and like do something about. And I like to say that class could be defined as a group of people whose similar material interests allow them to behave like a conspiracy without ever needing to actually conspire together. They don't need to get in a room. It's just class. That's all. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the danger of believing in, like, the Alex Jones version of a conspiracy story, right, is if you have this secret collective that is able to pull every string in the world, right, and make anything happen, well, what are you supposed to do about that, right?
Yeah.
And it allows you to retreat
totally
back
disempowering.
it allows you to retreat into cynicism and things like that, whereas, I mean, there's actual, like, class conspiracies and things, like, actual conspiracies, right, that it's like, hey, if you understand that these conspiracies are way dumber and way more callous than you imagine, like you can't do something about it. And people feel conspiracies are happening because they know they're not in the room of the powerful. And they know they have no voice in that room, and so they feel acted on. And that's the conspiratorial sort of mindset being acted on. It's like, well, we can do something about that. If they're super smart lizard people with space lasers, we're probably fucked, but luckily they're not. So luckily it's George W. Bush. He's a fucking moron, and I mean, to bring it back, Jeff Bezos, the world's dumbest man.
Well, I was going to say you already segued when you said super smart lizard people with lasers. Back to Jeff Bezos, favorite son of Seattle or something. Mary, you have some stories about working on the Bezos Center for Innovation.
I do.
One of our favorite words around here, innovation.
Yeah, who doesn't love the word innovation? It definitely doesn't scream exploitation right behind it.
Yeah.
I worked on the Bezos Center for Innovation before it was actually known by that name, back when it was still just an unnamed donor donating $10 million to the MOHAI to create a center for innovation, which was going to be the original name. Bezos not involved. So I was one of two researchers on that project that ultimately did most of the sort of on-the-ground research and then did a lot of the actual writing of the exhibits themselves. We were still lowly on the scale, so there was a person who was hired who was in charge of sort of the curation of the entire project, the vision of the entire project, and then my professor at the time and a couple of other intellectuals and consultants who were sort of making the decisions about, these are the pieces of, artifacts and things we want. But yeah, when it came to sort of like historical research, that was my job on the project. So I can talk about lots of stuff around that.
Yeah, we're all excited to learn about how innovation has been the prime driver of history and of prosperity in this region, and it's basically our religion here at Seattle Sucks, innovation. So yeah, help us understand, like, so I seen the exhibit because I went to MOHAI when they first opened up at the Armory, South Lake Union. That was a while ago now. So this is the period we're talking about actually. So, like, what is there? What is it all about? You know, like what message are they trying to get across?
I mean, so the message that I see they're trying to get across is that Seattle, for magical, really unknown reasons, is a center for innovation. And Brian and I were talking before this, reading some articles, and all of the, sort of taking myself back to that point of them opening this, and all of the articles that came out at the time were that Jeff Bezos and this person really can't pinpoint why this is a center of innovation, right? And I even remember this in our meetings, right? We're like, is it the rain? Is it the cloud? Like, and
seriously asking if it's
this
the rain.
This sickening question that came up every goddamn time we talk about is it the rain? Is it that it's cold?
It seemed like
and
that
so
was
it draws
Jeff's.
people inside to where they talk to each other then, and they like innovate. And it's like, well, one, I've never seen Seattle like go inside and talk to anybody else.
No, we don't
That's
do
not
that.
a thing that happens. So not that.
That is it the rain thing. That was a billboard at around that time, or like a few years before, that was about like
it was about MS.
It was about MS. Yeah.
Vitamin D deficiency was what I think they were thinking it was at the time.
Yeah.
Because in addition to being leaders in innovation, we're leaders in MS. So.
Yeah. And autism.
See, but Jeff probably saw that and was like, Microsoft. Microsoft is the product that the rain created. Because Jeff in the Seattle Times says it's the rain. Like, he's pretty affirmative.
Yeah, he says, I think in 2 or 3, he says it's the rain. No, it is the rain. And he said it for that reason that you just laid out, right? That we go inside and we ponder and we think. And it's like, no, we don't do that. We don't do that.
That's the dumb, like... What is that as a theory of history? Like,
I mean, I think it's a theory of progress. I think it's as a person who teaches 15-year-olds, and we unpack what the Enlightenment really is and the ways that it's this very colonized mindset. It's an unquestioning idea of progress, and progress being a good thing, right? The idea that innovation is just the new buzzword for capital and capitalization of an idea.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than using an idea for the community good. How do you turn the next thing into something you can make money off of? And that exhibit would not lead you to come to that nasty of an understanding of it, but I think that exhibit is meant to encourage children and any other simple person who can actually find that exhibit entertaining, which I don't know who can, but that what is good, what you should be doing is coming up with ideas, but only ideas that make money.
Yeah. But that's the innovation that we're talking about with Amazon, is like, I innovated the Sears catalog for the 21st century. I innovated a way to sell shit. And as we've discussed, like, at length on this podcast, actually to gather a lot of capital together in one room for the purpose of putting whole sectors of industries out of business to monopolize them. That's really the innovation, is just a really good like investment manager, like
well, and the irony is, in the original Gilded Age, right, the communication networks was the big innovation of, now we have these rail lines and things like that. We, telegraphs, we can communicate faster, move faster. Used the exact same way by the parents of the Gilded Age to, like, we can use these to pool capital into single areas and destroy everybody around us. So good on Jeff.
Yeah,
he's part 2.
Well, cool. You were talking about, like, this the link between capital and progress, and this belief in, like, a one direction of history toward progress, which is a very I think you said, it's like, that's about colonialism largely in its roots. It's very like white progress. But like, how is that reflected in the Bezos Center?
In the Bezos Center, I think in how uncomplicated a narrative they tell of both the history of Seattle's innovation, quote unquote, but also the exhibit makes use of several different historical examples to show how, I believe we've got ancient Athens, Rome, Timbuktu. Is it weirdly Detroit?
Detroit.
Is Detroit?
Yeah, that was the weirdest one on the
list.
list.
Makes total sense, right? Athens, Rome,
It's the square.
Timbuktu, and Detroit.
It's a square pizza.
Timbuktu.
It's the ones we always talk about.
At least that's outside of the very Enlightenment dismissal of the African origins of Western civilization.
And that was something I had asked to be a part of the exhibit, actually.
Well,
so that's
good.
Not part of the original plan.
Not part of the original
A little
plan.
too disruptive, I think.
Yeah, because they definitely didn't take my ideas.
The
of how we
market
talked
wasn't
about
ready, I
Timbuktu.
think.
So,
Well, how did Rome innovate?
well, and I mean, it's a great question. And so, we were tasked as researchers to take both Seattle and these other 4 examples and really sort of unpack the ways that they became quote-unquote centers of innovation. I think the thing that's important to note is that in all cases, Seattle included, it was just assumed that they all were centers of innovation. Well, that's a great assumption to make what innovation is. But we were just assuming this and going in to then look at this. And we were sort of told to really uncover the story, but it became very clear in that process that we didn't actually... We weren't supposed to be uncovering the story. We were supposed to be tracing a linear effect, cause and effect of how did Rome come to be, what at least now has been thought of as the seat of shining empire. How did Timbuktu come to be famous, as opposed to really looking at what were these centers? Were they centers of innovation? That was never a question asked. Were they centers?
Much
of
less
innovation?
about Seattle. So really, you were writing history for the victors.
We were, it made my stomach churn all the time. But I was also making $10,000 a year, and this was, groceries. So,
Yeah.
I think the story that we told of Rome, and the story this exhibit tells of Rome, is really telling. So, we've done a lot of research to really sort of unpack the Roman Empire and to unpack the city of Rome and really what it actually did stand for at the time, which it was not a seat of innovation. It was a place where innovations came to be bought and sold, right? It was a market for innovations, if you'd even call them that back then. And so the story we were telling was instead one then of an empire that had stolen knowledge from the periphery. Had marginalized the periphery, was not including them in sort of the economic largesse that was coming from this, and the ways that then also led to not only the height of Rome, but the declension of Rome. That amazingly, when you're not producing any knowledge from within, when you're not producing any sort of culture from within, when you're just stealing it from everybody outside of you and you're pissing them off, at a certain point, you fall apart. I guess that's not a great story when you're trying to talk about how Seattle is a city on the rise. Telling the story... I think the story of Timbuktu is even more problematic because Timbuktu, of course, did not have the same imperialist relationship with its periphery. It was certainly an unequal relationship, but African development was different. And the sort of power exchange was very different, thinking about just Mansa Musa and Mali and the way that sort of wealth operated while he was the wealthiest man, the amount of money that he also gave back into the regions that he was in was just very different than Western forms of imperialism. And so Timbuktu, and why it becomes much more what we might call a center of sort of knowledge and invention and innovation, is about a very different type of give and take that doesn't exist in Seattle. So Timbuktu becomes, in the story we were telling, another complicated story that doesn't match up with what's happening in Seattle in an uncomfortable way. That there are no billionaires just sucking money out of the economy for themselves. And the story that we tell of Seattle, ultimately, is the most problematic story that we tell, which is that why is Seattle a center of innovation? And it's a center of capitalist innovation. It is a place where capitalists are just ripping huge profits out of this place.
Yeah,
It's about war. It's about empire. It's about the history and the legacy of this place, which is that Boeing is nothing without the United States committing full-fledged to imperialist war against everybody. In the world.
just untold murders.
And that we know this because when the United States has to pull back from this even slightly after their defeat in Vietnam, what does this place become other than the place with the billboard that says, "Can the last person leaving Seattle please turn the lights out?" A sign that is pretty sure on display at MOHAI, like at least in pictorial form, and yet nobody's willing to go back to that and realize that, like, why was everybody leaving Seattle in the 1970s? It was because Boeing was no longer in that same place because the city didn't have the same glut of federal dollars coming into it.
Well, the area is a very militarized area, right? Just historically.
Extremely.
Yeah, how many bases? We've got Bremerton, we've got, what is it? Fort Lewis,
JBLM.
the JBLM, the joint base down there.
Yeah, and historically, like, it's a major. We've made a shitload of the planes and ships, for the Empire.
Well, I think the initial boom of Seattle and the progressive era is the World War I ship boom, shipbuilding boom. That of course then falls apart in the 20s, and the population goes down again.
Which is why, again, for a long time, Seattle is a boom bust economy. Like, what stops this from being a boom bust economy?
Well, we've solved that by having perpetual war,
total war
all around the world, so that we can just keep growing and growing, finding new markets to sell our weapons to, But
yeah, why is all of that so important? Well, it means that 47% of Boeing's income comes from the United States government, and it also means even as their employment fluctuates as they toy with how do they shrink their skilled labor force by mechanizing, that there is still a large skilled labor force here looking for work, which opens the door for other companies to come in and start exploiting that, right? Like, why is Microsoft here? Why is Amazon here? Well, it's certainly because we live in a spineless state that has no ability to tax any of them for their income, but also that there's a base of really skilled workers here to build off of. And so it's a weird combination then of, low taxes, high skilled workers to sort of pull off of.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of interesting in the exhibit, right? They give no mention of the IAM. None. Never shows up.
Or SPIA, right? Like the idea that there's a ton of engineers here that could move very easily from working in a Boeing factory to working at Microsoft. To
Tell us more about what those are.
So IAM is the International
Association of Machinists, Aerospace Machinists. Yeah.
And then SPIA, I have no idea what SPIA's acronym is.
The engineers.
SPIA is the engineering union. And they're two separate unions, but both workers at Boeing.
Huge membership because of Boeing.
Because of Boeing.
And very radical, particularly with the IAM.
Yeah, IAM has been very militant historically, right? And because of that, they've had very high wages. Like, the Boeing IAM chapter for the Puget Sound has historically had much better contracts than the International has, like, just anywhere else.
And I think we can't,
because of striking.
And I think we can't discount the fact that, why was the IAM able to do that? Well, because we have the longshore workers out here too.
The history of longshore workers, strikers,
and that's the most radical union in the country.
Well, right.
The country.
Of course, there's I'm sure everyone listening. Hopefully, it'll still be going when this comes out, but it's going on right now. The UTLA strike, and I was just listening to someone today talking about how the longshoremen are out there on those picket lines, just scaring the shit out of anyone who tries to fuck with them. They're not. You have 5 of those guys, on your line, and the cops are like, yeah, never mind, whatever.
Yeah. What I mean?
Or anyone else trying to get in, to cross that line,
And certainly in the early days of Seattle unionizing, I mean, it's the stories of cops going out and shooting striking workers, and quite frankly, the part that nobody ever wants to talk about, striking workers shooting cops, right? And that's how they would get the cops to stop shooting at them.
Yeah.
And, that's the part of American history you're not allowed to talk about.
Oh, we're allowed to talk about the cool part of American history here on this podcast.
But yeah, I think the interesting thing about them never mentioning this stupid innovation to the IAM is, Jeff's whole thing was like, oh, well, Amazon was able to be so successful here because of Microsoft engineers. They created this whole thing. But it's like, well, where'd they come from?
Right.
And, the thing is, we have all these college-educated people because we had guys going into the IAM who might have been high school graduates, but were making good money. And their kids could go to school, right?
Yeah.
And engineering had a value because they worked, these jobs, right? Where, like, that looked like a future, But none of that gets mentioned. That's all.
Even though Boeing gets mentioned in that exhibit, and again, it's the ways that they've just sort of whitewashed out that Boeing here is important, but we're not going to talk about why Boeing is important. The important thing is Boeing and the heads of Boeing, not the actual
Well, Boeing shows out the goodness of its heart to give good jobs, right? Go find a Boeing plant in China and tell me how great that's going.
Or they innovated new ways to decimate whole continents from the air. They're major innovators in how you kill the most amount of people. Well,
and the interesting thing, in that too, is just like Amazon, Boeing, I think for its first 20 or 30 years, never turned a profit.
Yeah.
But the state saw, and the United States saw the value in what was happening here, right? So they just continued to float Boeing's debt and continue to let them keep rolling through government contracts, things like that. And also, by the way, it does not get get a mention in the innovation exhibit. This role of the state of floating dead companies because they have, we can float a company to kill millions of people. We can also float one to not do that. That's a choice. That's a political choice, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Boeing's role in when one of the big booms here, when a lot of workers came here from around the country, was for the Second World War to build those B-17s that really invented a new form of warfare where killing civilian populations is actually the oldest form of warfare. It's that's what real war is, but we kind of got back to that in this new way a lot and made it very possible to do thanks to that plane that cranked out at least half of them here in the Seattle area that leveled every city in Japan and a whole lot of Germany as well.
Yeah. Well, and the innovation there, right, was finding ways to kill larger amounts of people with less people on your side.
Yeah.
Which, was important after the Russian Revolution and the, army turning against the Tsar, right? A lot of military thinkers were thinking about that of how can we kill more people with less people?
And more specialized professional soldiers than your pilots, they're not going to turn on you,
And I mean, to be more local about it, after World War II, more important here, considering what happened here during World War II, which is, as much as everybody likes to talk about World War II as the Great War, the one everybody was involved in, World War II saw the most working strikes ever, and some of the most difficult ones were here in Seattle, and they were Boeing workers going on strike. And so Boeing's efforts to develop what ultimately we have now, which are the CNC machines, right, the computer-operated machines, that comes directly out of Boeing's experience, Boeing's top-level sort of executives' experience with World War II, which was the ways that politicized machinists and engineers could shut down the war machine by not working for it anymore. And so you move from workers who are operating manual Bridgeport machining into let's computerize things, let's mechanize. And so that innovation of mechanization comes out of a realization by the bosses that we can't rely on workers to build war machines for us all the time.
This is something we talk about a lot, is that this cult of, I mean, it's part of the whole Enlightenment Whig cult of progress that is general pervasive in our culture, but specifically this innovation cult. You really have to you have to ask every time what's actually happening here, and a lot of it is just automation. of labor to devalue the power of labor.
Yeah, right. To take the skill out of the worker's head and put it into the machine, right?
And this is Jeff Bezos' pet project at every single level, right?
Yeah.
We can talk about his Mechanical Turk, right? Finding ways to turn, the masses of the unemployed into his pennies for a job employees, to, his investment in, what is it,
into robotics
what
and
is
stuff.
What is the name of his robotics company? It starts with a K. I can't remember.
No, I'm sure.
But yeah, into robotics to replace workers, right, in his warehouses. And ultimately, if we think about both him and we think about Microsoft and we think about what they're trying to do and have already achieved, we think about workers on the east side and what they're doing. They're already automated, right? They write lines of code like they're on a factory floor, right? One line at a time. And so what does innovation actually look like in this city and in this region? What it looks like is the constant lowering of wages, even in a place where what mostly we talk about is high-wage tech workers, which certainly are a reality, and certainly if you're a person of color or if you're queer, they're not the most fun to deal with in this city. But really, it's not just them. We're also looking at a place where innovation means those jobs are quickly being turned into low-wage assembly.
Oh yeah, that's not going to last. That's good. I mean, all the time, they're constantly pushing for. There's this massive push in our entire culture to prioritize STEM education, which you can see is just a way of externalizing the costs of training, what the workers that you do need, while at the same time, out toward the state, while at the same time, creating a larger pool of those workers so you can devalue their labor and pay them less.
Yeah, well, and bring in people too whose work is traditionally devalued too, so it comes together easily, right? The big thing about women in STEM is that it's easy to underpay them, because we have a cultural tradition,
And I have to add that it's it's all of those things, and as somebody who doesn't work in STEM, who has taught traditionally for the last 15 years in the humanities, it's also a way to further undermine, progressive politically, anti-racist, anti-capitalist work in the humanities. It's a way to prioritize STEM and deprioritize learning about when and where and why you should use these things, right? It always just makes me think of the Manhattan Project of cool, you know how to build an atomic bomb, and nobody ever taught you how to think about whether you should do this or not. Yeah. And that's what we're doing.
God damn,
right?
This really is a triple threat, the STEM thing. Get the state to pay for the training. More people in a generation of people who have the basis for this stuff, so that they can pay people less, and devaluing the humanities in education to make us just all stupider and less politically aware.
Yeah, and I mean,
cool.
And to give you an idea of the kind of direction this innovation has gone on the West Coast, is California libertarians going back to the 60s had this dream of building an island off the coast of California that they were all going to live on. Yes, they're going to seastead, right? And they could never figure out whether they were going to have slaves or just ship in labor from Mexico, right? So it always fell apart. And the closest it's come to a real thing is that Peter Thiel wants to bring a barge off the coast of San Francisco so he can bring in, since it'll be in international waters, they'll bring in low-wage labor from South Asia to code, and that way you don't have to deal with pesky things like minimum wage laws or things like that. You bring them in and you just make them a workforce for hire, right? And they just pound out code for whoever needs it. And I mean, this is the vision, right? A world of coders is not a world of people with high wage jobs. A world of coders is people on a barge like the movie Waterworld, pounding out code while Peter Thiel sits in a weird Howard Hughes.
There's the innovation in Silicon Valley that is, even worse than the movie Sorry to Bother You, which is you can rent a bunk/desk in a warehouse with a barcode.
Yeah.
And you can work and sleep and not have sex all in the same place.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that
Well, who needs a bed or a place to live when you have such a cool job?
Yeah, right.
When it's so much fun.
Well, when we're doing what we love.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So right across the canal here is the Seattle Google campus.
Yeah. And Tableau is, so aren't they over there too?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's over there.
They're just on the other side of the bridge. So they're right along the Fremont Bridge, and I cross the bridge all the time on foot. I walk along, and I can see in like the second or third story windows of the Google offices. And I'm like, God, I just want to throw rocks because like there's this giant room that has like I don't know, like foosball and ping pong tables and like a whatever Xbox or whatever the fuck it is on a couch, and it's just like so like boilerplate predictable, but it has this big, in huge letters, one wall has like these 3-dimensional block letters that say "Play hard." The implication being work hard, you know?
Yeah.
But, like, that is just so perfect. Like, so, like, they don't have to say it. Like, you know what that means.
I was to say, every friend that I've had who's worked in tech and worked in places like that, they all know better than to use any of those facilities, too, right? They all know that to walk into that room, to walk into the fancy nap room, all of which are things that have definitely sold them on the job.
Yeah.
And once they've got the job, they know those are not places that people who want to stay at Google, stay at Microsoft ever use. And so it's this interesting way that they become both a center of enticement and discipline.
Yeah.
It's a great innovation.
Yeah, definitely.
No, it is.
Right? Like,
it is.
Yeah,
Like,
it's forbidden fruit, basically.
It is. Like, nobody gets in a nap pod unless you're trying to just stay where you are.
What's that perfect, like, modern Protestantism, right? Of, like, you know, the fruit is right there, but you can never
touch
it.
Yeah, it's the tantalizing.
Self-discipline.
There's another side to it, too, which is that those things are actually very stupid. And so when you're confronted with the reality of, like, you're at your job and you're like, nap pod. That seems so cool and weird and futuristic and utopian, and now I'm like, I'm not doing that. But I don't know.
Well, and like you're at your work and you hate your job, like the last thing you want to do is go hang out in the break room, right? You know, be like, let's go play ping pong when we don't have to be here. It's like, oh, let's get the hell out of here. But I mean, they do that also. Like a lot of tech companies do everybody has unlimited vacation, but it's known amongst all the employees if you take vacation, you will be fine. Like when it comes time to cut people, you're going, right? So it's this like horrible situation of like they get to get the medium piece written about how great they are as a company because of this, but then nobody ever is allowed to use it.
So I mean, like, so coming back around to our horrible innovation center, I mean, part of it too, what's interesting about it is that, there's really very few things that I can recall that are in that exhibit that you would call like Seattle innovations, right? These are things that are built off of sort of work that's been done in all sorts of places, and so. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. There's the part of me as somebody who's not from this city that just feels like this is a desperate attempt on the part of Seattle to feel relevant.
That is,
Like,
that's
very
Seattle.
city.
No, absolutely. And to sell itself on this
Mm-hmm.
idea. I mean, this is a problem. This is a larger problem in tech in general. We talk about this on the podcast, that all these supposed innovations are really just like the gradual expansion of a technology from the 1920s called computers that people have found myriad ways to monetize over time as they've gotten more powerful by using the computer to make the next computer.
After they were developed at like great federal expense.
Enormous
tax dollars, right?
Enormous.
And
like,
with all of these things, that's what's missing, right? So like there are a bunch of like medical sort of tools in the exhibit, all of which, again, like, where does that come from? A lot of it is state money, whether it's from the university. But, I think the biggest thing to me that is really problematic when thinking about this and thinking about, like, that switch from the thing that's supposed to be the Center for Innovation to, this is now Bezos Center for Innovation, is just, like, it brings out this problem of private money in what is supposed to be seemingly a public institution, or at least a semi-public institution, right? Which is that he gets to decide what it is, right? He gets to take the knowledge that we created, that say what you will about us, but like we dug up the stories, and he gets to decide and pick and choose what of that story gets told ultimately. And more than that, I think something that's really hard to deal with in seeing that museum is that, as I was talking about earlier, the new MOHAI space is smaller than the old space. But, you know, moving to a new space seemingly offers the idea that, like, oh, we can revitalize, we can revamp these exhibits that we have, we can change over. And that didn't really happen, and so what it means is that
I remember
MOHAI still has some really problematic...
Which is all hidden up in the top now.
MOHAI has some really problematic exhibits around, say, like, indigenous culture and what was here before European settlement. There's not much spent on that. What's spent on, you know, the Denny parties and their encounters with indigenous peoples is not great. I'm pretty sure they still have those terrible dioramas in there that have been there for years.
Those are from the old place, too.
That, you know, their accounting of Chinese and Chinese American workers on the docks is still not great. And so what it means, too, is that $10 million was spent to make a really sad-ass exhibit that is not enjoyable to go through and is not accurate about what innovation looks like in this city. But it also means $10 million that was denied to, you know, revamping and revitalizing and telling revisionist histories about things that have happened here that are important. And so in no way does this Center for Innovation, you know, do things that I think are actually important, like raising marginalized voices and bringing them more to the center of what the history of this city is. And that feels really fucked up for a city that is, you know, on indigenous land.
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in this area, of course. I'm from here. And so I got, you know, the local education about the region, and I went on field trips to MOHAI specifically in its old location on the canal. And I think the basic gist, if I was to like think back and sum up like the settler relation and Seattle like colonization relation to the indigenous people, it would be this. It would be like it's just like, how do I phrase some really fucked up shit? It would be like that. The impression that I got was basically like, well, the Indians here weren't as savage and violent as the ones you see in the movies. Also, they lived in real houses, and so when white people came here, they were just all friends. I mean, that's basically
which is really messed up, right?
It's some fucked up shit. Oh, and they smoked salmon.
And the ways that like that Center for Innovation is a permanent exhibit in a fairly small museum too.
Yeah, and it's an exhibit that is like sucks like aesthetically too.
Yeah,
like, I think that should be clear.
Yeah.
Like,
I said that earlier. It's terrible.
It's bad to look at and go through. Even
boring and
politics
weird.
Aside, it's not good.
Like a post-it part of
it.
It's not good. But yeah, that's a permanent exhibit that is taking up a lot of space in a not very big museum. In a city that, again, sort of like constantly denies access and space for people of color to meaningful sort of like, meaningful room to share and talk about and think about their stories. You know, I'm thinking about the ways that like Daystar Center is so marginalized out in Discovery Park, and the ways that like the black population in this city that, you know, was always small is diminishing. And so for a museum to take that money and to laud this, both at the time and even to this day, right, as a great thing for the city.
Yeah, well, it contributes what the city demands, which is a reinforcement of our innovation myth, which is a powerful force in local politics. We've spent a lot of time talking about Mayor Jenny's Innovation Council, which is
still hasn't innovated.
It's like a joke just to say it, but this idea, like, all you need to do to identify and then solve problems is to call together the brilliant people from our innovative industry, our commercial geniuses. That's where the solutions will come from.
Well, and certainly with like public problems too with the Innovation Council is like innovation is just a scope for just completely ignoring the problem too, right? Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we need to bring the innovators in to talk
Well,
about
it's like
homelessness as if the problem isn't in the name, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like-
yeah. Exactly. No, right. Like to identify, because that's in the original brief. It's like to identify problems. It's
Yeah.
like, the problems are staring you in the face.
Yeah.
But right, it's like it's a new spin, an innovative spin on the old technique of like, a blue ribbon commission to delay as a delaying tactic.
Yeah.
This brings us to like what we want to talk about next, which is something very topical and immediate right now, which is the city, the Seattle squeeze, the period of maximum constraint that we're going through for the next month or the next 5 years. I've read.
It's the next 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, 5 years.
I believe.
And it's like,
That's 2024, 2025.
and the Innovation Council, I mean, they didn't. We didn't innovate our way out. It's like it's this thing that we've been able to see coming for, since when was the earthquake that broke
the 90s, basically.
the goddamn thing?
Yeah. Well, in a series of projects too that just knowing a little bit about construction had to have been in the works years in advance, right?
Oh,
so,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we're talking about a series of things that like we're here on the moment, the day of. And all of a sudden it's like, I think we're going to have a problem, guys. I think when we shut down half the city, the streets of the city, this could be fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
But we weren't able to innovate any solutions, even though they're staring us in the fucking face, which is like what people in this city have been fighting for my entire life, and that is mass transit.
Yeah.
Just like fighting like passionately and bitterly, voting for it multiple times, like we're fine. It took the light rail is a huge victory. How the speed at which it is being built feels like a victory in this town. Okay, because like, I mean, I don't need, that sounds insane to say, but like, nothing was happening for most of my lifetime when people were continually voting to, for example, extend the monorail through, like, out to different neighborhoods so that you had like a above grade level train like moving people around. But like, where are we now?
Yeah. Well, Seattle always pretends like it's the first city that ever existed. Like
First, day one mindset. Day one mindset.
Walked into
Bezos
that.
innovation. Man, that's
as if there's never been a city that has a dense population and traffic problems that resolved it.
Yeah.
That was also on an ocean or a body of water. Yeah,
Because that's what they always tell you, right? There's
from
water
the-
nearby because it's the first thing that's ever been built near water.
Interestingly.
I mean, it was wild. I was in China this summer for about a month, and it was just wild to be in a country that is building transit in a way that just makes no sense here. In the sense that, like, I was in Chongqing, which is in the Sichuan province. Yeah,
that's
which
invested in
is
infrastructure.
a city that went from about 2 to 5 million about 10 years ago. It's now a city of 30 million people.
The Great Sauce Boom. Mm-hmm.
And in 5 years has gone from having no subway to having an entire connected subway line.
Wow, yeah.
And it's amazing and it's beautiful and it runs on time every 2 minutes. And
Every 2 minutes.
And it's...
Shut the fuck up.
It's both a mountainous region and it's, Chongqing is in Sichuan, so it has the Yangtze and a tribute river of the Yangtze coming together. Like, so 2 major rivers coming together through the middle of the city. There's an island in the middle of all of that. Like, we're talking about, like, subways going through the middle of apartment buildings.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. And they did it in 5 years because for them, transit was a priority.
Mm-hmm.
Moving people around the city was a priority.
Their society functioning is a priority.
Yeah.
People talk a lot about the ways that China has marketized over our lifetimes, and I want to say they're not communist anymore or whatever, and like that's a whole thing to get into, but like they still
do
development on
social spending is important.
Yeah, on a national level. They can do that because on their national level they know they control a fucking sovereign currency and can spend fucking money to develop their society that's going to pay off later and make their lives of citizens better. Like, we knew that here at one point in America when we were desperately trying to forestall a Bolshevik-style revolution in this country during the Cold War, where we put money into infrastructure to modernize cities, to electrify the countryside, etc. But we're doing these projects like Sound Transit is the great example. It's like it's happening at this incredible snail's pace, not because of any kind of fucking engineering challenges. It's this pay-as-you-go thing that's just like a little at a time. These levies, we'll stretch it out over a decade, and that for this part, and then the next decade for the next part, and it's like that's just because you're unwilling to. We're not getting grants from the federal level to just do it, and you're unwilling to deficit spend on the state level.
Yeah. And also that, so like the snide thing I would get from people back home when I tell them about the subway systems and the new ones built was like, well, and they destroy people's houses. And I'm like, really? You think that they built I-5 through LA without destroying Mexican American
subways go underground.
That's not the problem. That's not why those things aren't getting built here, because there's such respect for like individual people's houses. The difference being that like in China, it's like, yeah, we're going to have to build through your home, so we're going to move you over here, versus here, none of these developers give a shit about whose house they're moving through, but they do care about what other developers think. So why do we have a tunnel instead of just a new viaduct bridge? Yeah. Because real estate speculators were like, there's too much to speculate here. Let's spend $3 billion building a garbage tunnel nobody can use to go anywhere. And
all so, like, to make that real estate. This is like no, it's like Lex Luthor shit. Okay, this is like Superman 2 shit. That's is it 2?
I don't know, man.
Wow, I'm gonna get some angry emails about this.
It was the superior Bryan Singer one. Don't at me.
Wow, that is a dark take.
Greg, what a weird take for you to take on Superman Bryan Singer being the best one.
No, it's Lex Luthor. Like there's even an earthquake involved. It's all about like reshaping the waterfront in this way that just makes that property there like incredibly valuable. And you could have done that in a way that would be good for a lot of people. Well,
the cover is the park. That's what the mayor's office is leading with. Everyone's saying there's going to be all this public space, but that really will pale in comparison to speculative luxury real estate.
Well, and the money that will be made on the real estate, but also the money that was invested at the time, like with the anticipation, right? So they could shove this tunnel through, right? And this thing that costs so much more than just building the bridge again, right?
Yeah.
That money could have been plowed into transit.
Well, you don't even have to build the bridge again. What they're going to have in the end is like a many-lane boulevard of Alaskan Way, which is all that San Francisco replaced the Embarcadero Freeway with when it fell down in the 70s. As ours did, they rebuilt it here. They didn't there.
Yeah.
And they just put in, instead of a big ugly freeway, they just put in a multi-lane boulevard that, it's not exactly the same because it's not, that section of it isn't like the main, get north-south through the city, because you're going to stay on the 101, basically, if you're trying to do that, but in San Francisco. And I can't even get angry at investing the $3 billion in an infrastructure project. It's been pointed out by people here, like Charles Modini and The Stranger, that, at a time when the global economy was taking a shit, that put a lot of people to work in the city, some kind of infrastructure jobs program that didn't exist nationally. And there's nothing wrong with having a stupid tunnel under the ground in a society that had transit to work, but that is what moved politics here. That was able to get done. This really questionable, and extremely questioned project, very contentious thing, very politically unstable thing that a lot of people were against, that was able to get railroaded through. But because it benefited the right interests. And but anything that might actually benefit society as a whole, is pie in the sky crazy shit.
Sure, yeah, because state spending always works, right? I think it's in like 2008 in the middle of the crisis, like Paul Krugman wrote this article about like, well, we got out of the Great Depression because of World War II, because we're building like all this stuff. Like we could just build all that stuff again, just shove it in the ocean, like just build helicopters and shove them in the ocean or whatever. And it was like this like complete like lack of imagination of like, well, state spending actually does help in a crisis, but you don't have to just build shit, right? Like we could have, you know, that $3 billion would have been just as much an economic boon if we had built just a giant hole and we're like, we're going to build a super road to China and just build a hole and see if we get there. But we also could have built out public, like this city, it couldn't be more obvious. The city requires a real system of mass transit and a futuristic one like they had in 1910. Where streetcars took you everywhere, and you didn't need a fucking car. You know, some reason that was incredibly possible in 1910, but is absolutely impossible today. You know, it cannot be done. Just, you know.
And so it means that the fact that they've spent $3 billion on a tunnel that takes you none of the places you want to go in a car. Then at the same time, right, they're dedicating money to shutting down a tunnel that had 600 buses going through it a day. And the fact that they're also spending tens of millions of dollars on bike lanes.
Yeah, I mean, the future transit isn't going to be people on bikes. Let's be serious. This is crazy.
It's at least not if you actually care about working class people and where working class people live in this region and where they work in this region. And,
well, it's like...
And it's really frustrating as a working class person to see this happening, right? It's frustrating to watch bike lanes come in. It was frustrating when I lived still on the north side to watch them coming. And the ways that, you know, talking to people who either were not working class or at least did not see themselves as working class were so excited that, like, they're spending money on bike lanes and that you're kind of an asshole if you say something against these bike lanes. And yet to me, like, having grown up poor and now living in this city, like, a bike lane is a sign of gentrification. It's a sign that, like, wealthy people are moving in because who has time?
Well, you're about to be moving out.
Like, who has time to, you know, bike ride 7 miles to work?
Right.
You have to have money and or you have to work from home, and so bike riding is really just a hobby for you. That, like, as somebody who for most of my time in this city has had, you know, a 10 to 15 to 20 mile commute. The idea that, like, just get on a bike, friend, like, is ridiculous.
Well, and it rains all the time. There are hills all over this city. I kind of hate to say it, but it is sort of ableist to be like, just get on a bike.
Ableist.
Just get on a bike. Not everyone can get on a bike for a variety of reasons.
Listen, go straight up a hill.
In a much better city, in a completely different economic paradigm that wasn't fucking insane, and people could live near they work, which is the most insane innovation of our society. This idea that you should live fucking 20 miles away from where you work is fucking batshit. And there are there's a huge number of nexus of reasons for this, you know, I mean, but in a better society where that wasn't true, bike lanes would be very cool if most people were able to live within a mile or two of their place, and you rebuilt, then the streets were reflected that the way they were designed, and you had a shitload of mass transit to get people around. Like, bike lanes would be a cool, normal thing you'd want to have. But making that the like focal point of our, like, transit development in the city, this very relatively cheap, easy thing to do that makes you sound very, I don't know what, instead of just building fucking trains. And
it's easy to do because for the most part, rich people like it. Right, and that's the thing, right? Because they know if it goes up in their neighborhood, the poors can't park on the side of the street anymore, and they won't be living there, right? And then it'll raise their home value, and so they like it, and it's good, and they don't like mass transit for all the same reasons they didn't like it in 1910, by the way, when Queen Anne organized to keep the train from going up into Queen Anne, right? Like, they don't want the poors coming, right? That's why they hate mass transit. Right. And once the rich retook downtown Seattle, like, that's when all this shit started happening of, like, well, let's start getting rid of parking spaces in the name of, you know, the environment. These people didn't care one bit about it until they moved down there, right? Let's start having just walk-only roads when we close roads off. And the thing is, like, it's, you know, they're building the walls, like, around the city after they shoved all of us out, right? And, you know, when you look at the problems of Seattle transit, the idea that people are just going to, that we're going to resolve this problem with fucking bikes, or the dumber one of e-scooters, like we're all just going to rent scooters and zip around. I mean, one, I would love to see the scooters go up any of those hills, but I mean, this is like a fundamentally stupid concept. Totally. Like, and it's stupid on its face. I don't even know why people seriously talk about it. It's
lipstick on a pig.
Yeah,
man.
yeah. We need the same thing every fucking city on the planet has. This is not the first city that was ever built. Like, we had it in this city. That's the crazy part. It's like, you need streetcars. Yeah. They have to actually fucking connect.
It's all still there, too. Yeah. Everywhere you go around, the tracks are all still there. And then you know that underneath them is the big fucking cable wheels, like, and literally the cable is still on the ground. Like, it's a fucking joke, man.
Well, and you were saying, like, you know, they do it this, like, stupid pay-as-you-go way, and, you know, not to be, like, conspiratorial, given what we talked about earlier, but I swear to God they do that shit on purpose, because, like, definitely. If I make this system as shitty as possible for the first 10 years, where it doesn't go anywhere, or you have to get off and then walk a mile to get to a bus, like, people are going to hate it, and they're not going to want it, and it'll never get finished.
At every level, and this is something, another thing, I always come back to this, but Charles Medidi in The Stranger, God, I love that man. Like, keeps, like, beating his head against his monitor, typing out these screeds against the insane logic of Sound Transit's, they can't understand, or they won't admit that transportation induces its own demand. Okay, so we know this. This is something we won't admit about freeways, okay, that is what causes people to live fucking 20 miles away, that then causes traffic, condenses people onto one highway. Same thing with the fucking trains. Like, they'll say, they'll have limited number of runs and limited number of hours, because they'll go, well, you know, only this many people use it when it comes once an hour, so maybe we should actually cut back.
Yeah.
Not like, we can only really go to like 10 o'clock at night or something to this place because, like, not that many people are using it. But, like, that's fundamentally stupid because people want to get around. This, again, it's not a new fucking idea. So if you had these options available, if the trains came every 2 fucking minutes and went 24 hours a day, and I guarantee they do in China, they must go 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of places they do.
I think in every major city on the planet that isn't in the United States, they come 24 hours a day.
I mean, if they were like that, that would induce way more people to use them, you know? Yeah. And it's like,
I was in Berlin at one point, and I'm in the middle of Berlin, and I have a choice. I can take the subway. I can take the streetcar. I can take the light rail. I can catch a bus. You know, it's like, you know what I didn't do in Berlin? Take a fucking car anywhere. And nobody did, because why would you? Because all that was available. It was all super efficient. And guess what it also was? It was fucking free. It was a suggestion whether you wanted to pay, and you didn't have to. And you know what? Everybody was on it. Everybody. And I don't think the people of Berlin have some bug in their brain that's different than us.
Well, they do, but
it's not to do with that, though. It's mainly about house music. But
it's techno, it's not house.
Oh, shit.
Whoa, called out.
All right, guys, I'll see you later.
Oh, my God.
Listen. That exact complaint, right? That, like, but people don't pay to use it. It's like, yeah, but they all use it, and so it means when it comes time to pay taxes for it, none of them have a problem paying taxes for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
They just publicly fund it.
So you don't have to gouge people for something. They all just pay for it because you've made it an indispensable resource for it.
But I don't want to be stuck in a train car with a smelly bum, I guess is really
it's like the complaint. Well, the homeless ride on it. It's like, yes, homelessness is a problem. We could probably resolve that as well.
Right, exactly. Like,
through all the same mechanisms.
Happy to address that, like, with a structural critique, you know?
And also, a problem that's been solved in lots of places, too.
And I mean, again, I think it's just, like,
you know,
nobody who actually needs transit is saying these, though.
Sure.
Right? Like, nobody who needs transit is the one keeping transit from happening in this city.
Sure. Right. Although I do think there are people who drive who they have a valid complaint that the transit in the city sucks, and like, well, why have more of it?
No, I'm saying none of them are saying, like, I wouldn't get on a train with a smelly homeless. Oh,
sure, yeah.
They wouldn't use transit now because the transit is crap in this city.
Yeah.
And they can't honestly, wait 3 hours to get
if you're all being moved efficiently, the guy that smells like patchouli next to you will get to his location efficiently too. So, you know, problem solved.
Yeah.
But
Well, and maybe he will ride that line the whole day, but who fucking cares? You're gonna get out eventually. Like,
Yep.
so what? 40 minutes? That's
just saying-
that's generous. Like,
Even that,
15 minutes of your day
I'm just
is
saying, like, people don't
inconvenienced by seeing someone else.
our
in
homeless
society.
problem was not created by transit.
Right,
Like,
right,
that's
no.
the issue, right?
Right.
And, like, the homeless
Yeah.
thing, you know, and it's a very solvable problem. And it's also a solvable problem that would help most people, which is
Yeah.
we should just build housing and
Right.
maybe call housing a right and just maybe put people in it for free or
Yeah.
for nothing.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
weird
that's-
idea.
totally.
But,
Yeah. Well, so okay, so right now, see, we're just fucked, basically, right? I mean, so Shama Swamp was saying to anyone who would listen, we should make transit free at least just during this time. Just get more
Yeah.
people on buses and trains. Couldn't even that the quotes back from the various bureaucratic institutions was like, well, we don't have a policy that allows us to do that. So
yeah.
it's like, it's not really the point is, like, that should be the policy, you know? Like,
yeah, well, I think Mary Jeannie had, like, some response, too, that was like, well, if it's free, it wouldn't cost money.
yeah, basically.
Don't see how that logic works.
It's like 27% of their budget is covered by those fares. So it's
she was like a robot, and like her eyes were
Yeah,
spinning,
yeah.
and like smoke was coming out. She's like, "Oh, does not compute." And just like fell over. But well, and even there was a guy from Seattle Transit that they had asked who was like, basically his thing was, if it was free, it would be really popular. So
Yeah, right.
we can't do
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
you know?
yeah, that would
which
be
feeds
really
my conspiratorial
ridiculous.
brain
Yeah,
on
yeah.
this situation
No,
that they
no,
are
that is-
actively fucking this
It
up.
is the same thing. But it's like, it is this brain disease of, like, not seeing, like, oh, yeah, that would make, then we wouldn't have this problem. Like, we could be zipping around in futuristic train cars, like, stepping on and off for free and not worrying about it. And everyone would love that. Like, what's the downside exactly? Like, oh, fuck, man.
I mean, honestly, and again, reporting from Berlin, you could be hammered on a train. You can drink on the train. I feel like this is a big selling points.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like, people complain about drunk driving and all this kind
Right.
of shit. And it's like, the answer is not the drunks. The answer is the driving part. You know, why do people
Yeah.
drive? Because they have to.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
why they drink? Because you have to.
Otherwise, that car is just sitting somewhere. That's the worst part of having to drive somewhere. You've got this fucking car you got to lug around with you. We know this sucks. I mean, there's not much more to say about it than we have. It's like that's the joke, right? Is like
Yeah.
it's already it's happened. All right, this is all very dark. On a lighter note, let's finish up today with a Cop Files update from
Yeah.
Brian.
Catching up on the story. Well, we have like two fun police stories. You know, one's kind of quick, but in August there was this police officer. We'll go through the story a bit here, but that's not even a regular beat officer, but a sergeant who was in the Central District and was overseeing the impounding of a young man's car because his tabs were out of date.
Yeah.
Which, as far as I'm concerned, you should be able to shoot back at the police for that. But, I mean, what bullshit. But anyways.
I agree completely.
And it
So
was like parked in like AutoZone parking lot too, right? Like,
no, the kid worked at the AutoZone. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
kid, and I say kid, I think he was 18 or 19 in the story. But so he comes out, obviously is very upset that this is happening, and has some words with the police officer, right? So the police officer, as he's getting ready to leave, rolls his window down, yells out to this guy and his girlfriend, you know, have a nice day, I'll be seeing you later.
Whoa.
He shows, which is always super cool to hear.
Yeah.
Which, as if, you know, just to lay the story out, white cop, black youth,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the cop then shows up at the AutoZone in the Central District that this gentleman works at.
normal.
In a very normal way, he pulls out a chair from his car,
Also normal.
Yeah.
sets it down on the sidewalk in front of the AutoZone, and just proceeds to sit there.
But picture like a rolly, swivelly office chair.
Yeah, barely an office chair because he's that big a piece of shit. And he, so he's sitting there, and people are coming by and asking him what's going on, and he says, well, you know, a guy who works here, he was disrespectful to me, so I'm going to sit here until he comes out and apologizes to me, right? And this goes on for a while, and apparently police officers are stopping, high-fiving, and whatever, you know, like, like hanging out, bringing him a juice box, I don't know, right, you know? And finally, some woman from the neighborhood walks up to him and says, hey, I've heard what you're doing, and, this is harassment, this is intimidation, this is fucking bullshit. And I guess shames him after 40 minutes of doing this. Finally shames him into leaving, right? They file a complaint, right? So we're in the process that we talked about in the previous episode that goes on forever, right?
Yeah.
Well, it comes out that Spog had, in its email conversations back and forth about the potential discipline for this for this cop, was like, oh, well, this is a very minor offense. Like, we don't see what the problem is, and all this stuff. Which goes to show that the police have literally learned absolutely nothing in this entire period of the consent decree, which brings us to our next beautiful bit of news, which is a little update from the Spog contract debate.
Yeah.
We had talked about there was a Seattle police officer who had responded to a domestic disturbance. This is back in, I believe, 2014. And he went any, meeny, miny, mo to decide who he's going to arrest in this disturbance. Decides to arrest the woman, who is most likely intoxicated. Handcuffs her, puts her in the back of his car, claims she tried to kick him, and then he punches her in the face so hard that he breaks her eye socket.
Yeah.
The police decide that they need to react strongly to this and fire him. 2 years later, after a video comes out and the entire city loses its fucking mind that this shit happened, and it becomes extremely embarrassing.
Weird.
So they fire this guy. Then Spog immediately begins appealing this decision, which brings us all the way up to October of 2018. On October 31st, Spog, the city attorney's office, and a lawyer with SPD make a decision that they are going to not only reinstate this officer, but they're going to give him, as a reward, 2 years of back pay, amounting to probably around $200,000, for having such a great right hook, I guess, or whatever, because these people are fucking awful.
Brian, that story really sucks, but I'm imagining them all wearing their really cool Halloween costumes, and that makes it a little bit.
One of them was certainly dressed as a football. I think we can all agree. But so they then begin an email conversation because they know this contract is coming up that essentially is going to turn back this 2017 police accountability ordinance that had been passed. It's going to completely reverse the ordinance, right? And so the police are really big on this, and Jenny Durkin has been pushing hard to get the Spog contract signed because she's a key player and essentially making the Seattle police as awful as they can possibly be.
Prosecutor, right?
Yeah, she was the U.S. attorney overseeing it, who actually, it was very funny going back and looking at some of that stuff, was repeatedly other observers with the U.S. attorney's office would repeatedly come out and say, like, SPD is acting in bad faith, they're doing, they're we should be like hammering them harder, and Durkin would repeatedly come out and like tamper all that down and all that kind of shit. She's their person on the inside, right?
Wow.
So emails finally get. Last week, the Seattle Times was able to grab emails that were going between the city's attorney's office, the Spog lawyers, and the SPD lawyers, and they find out that on October 31st, they come down with this ruling that they knew was going to be extremely controversial, that people were going to be extremely unhappy with, and that this could potentially mess with the contract negotiation and the vote in City Hall. So they decide that they're just going to cover it up and not release any information about it until after the vote has been made.
That sounds like good faith.
Which is what they did, and it's important to point out that the Spog contract was opposed by every community organization in the city. It was opposed by the NAACP, and it was opposed by the Civilian Police Commission, which is the only which came out of the consent decree, and is the civilian group is supposed to be watching what the police are doing and reporting on it. It was voted for 8-1. So guess who the negative or nay vote was.
Very surprising to see Sally Bagshaw vote that way.
And so, I'll see if I can find it real quick, but I think it is Sally Bagshaw actually threw a quote to the Times.
She loves to.
Which is worth. Oh, no, Lisa Herbold, throws a quote to the Times, where when the Times brings up, like, hey, it really looks like they were trying to, like, cover this up, so you fucking morons would go vote for this thing you shouldn't have voted for anyways. And her only response was, the idea that the parties to this negotiation would withhold information because they thought our knowing it would impact our vote is reprehensible. Read into that, they were going to vote yes on this contract no matter what. And insulting. because it suggests that the Council is unaware of the serious problems with the appeals process and the injustice resulting from it. Knowledge that led us to work with the CPC to change that process in the 2017 Accountability Ordinance. So, in short, it's reprehensible that they would withhold this information for us, knowing that we'd vote for this stupid thing anyways. And that we know that the accountability process is awful, which is why we voted for this ordinance in 2017, that we also know that we've just repealed by voting for the contract. And I like citing the CPC, who was specifically against the contract for this exact reason. So that is where we are with CLPD. I think it's now safe to say the reform process of SPD is officially done and is not going to happen in any way, shape, or form.
So they're good now.
Yeah.
They've been reformed.
Congratulations, Seattle!
So, yes, clap. Do we break the champagne out? It sounds like a big success, yeah.
That bottle's empty. Like, all right. Thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really fun time.
Thanks for having us.